LinkedIn News.
I think the Enneagram is being used more and more in businesses with leaders and teams. And I always admire the leaders who choose to bring the Enneagram in, because I think to myself, this person is more aware and understands that if people can be more themselves and bring more of who they really are to work, everything's going to be better for everyone, including the business.
That's Enneagram expert Bea Chestnut. I'm Bea Chestnut, and this is Everyday Better. Stay tuned for more on how the Enneagram shows up for you and your team at work and how to use it to improve your communication, collaboration, and leadership skills. Make sure you hit that follow button to get new episodes of our show every week. And if you're a regular listener, thank you. And I have a favor to ask. Consider leaving us a review so we can keep bringing you more conversations you love. Thanks so much for your support. Hey everyone, from LinkedIn News, I'm Bea Chestnut, and this is Everyday Better, a personal development podcast where every week I sit down with some of the world's brightest minds and bravest hearts who use science and story to share strategies for how we can flourish individually, in relationship to others, and to the world around us. Thanks for joining us for part 2 of our Enneagram series with top Enneagram educator and psychotherapist Bea Chestnut. Now, I wanted to have these conversations with Bea because I feel like I'm always hearing chatter about the Enneagram, but a lot of people don't quite know how to put it to use. By the way, if you don't know what the Enneagram is, you might have heard someone saying they're a type 1 or a 3 or a 1-wing 2, etc. So if you don't know much about it, I highly recommend going back to the last episode. Bea will answer all of your questions about what it is, what the types are, and how to use it. In this episode, we're focusing on how to use the Enneagram specifically at work. Now, as an Enneagram coach myself, I've worked with teams using this tool to improve how they work together, how they understand each other, and how they become better leaders. And I will tell you firsthand, it is so impactful. A big part of my work was really based on Bea's book, The 9 Types of Leadership. So I asked her to give us a breakdown of how each Enneagram type looks at work, along with how they can become better leaders. She's also going to dig into which Enneagram number we Americans are most influenced by and how to break those patterns in our work culture. Here's Bea.
I learned a lot about how much our centers of intelligence influence how we operate in the world through being in partnership. And my business partner is a 5. He's a mental type, and I'm an emotional type. And I've learned so much from him around how differently he experiences the world than I do. It's almost like the water we swim in is different. Our language is different. The way we experience the world is different. And just like that's true for the 9 types, it's also to a degree true for body types, heart types, and head types in a way that sometimes it's hard to speak to, but is really helpful to know, especially in a business setting. And this is, by the way, one of the things I do with teams that they get the most benefit from is when we figure out what type everyone is on a team, we do a team map. And it's really interesting to know how many heart types, how many body types, and how many head types you have on your team. And one of the things that's really true is each type has kind of a set of strengths that they sort of focus on deploying in the world or at work, but they overdo them and they don't develop a wider range of strengths. So every type has sort of strengths and then blind spots or challenges, areas that they kind of ignore or they don't develop naturally. And so, of course, the growth path for the types is seeing, okay, how am I either overusing my strengths, or sometimes I have some natural strengths that I'm not owning fully, and so I'm not deploying. And what are my areas of development that I tend to ignore because it doesn't feel like a strength, so it's not very comfortable.
I'd love for you to run through the 9 types, maybe a little bit of a description of the types, a little bit of how that might look at work, the challenges they might face, and then their growth path. And for those of you listening, I know you're probably going to listen for your type, but I'd also say that because the Enneagram is so powerful in its ability to build empathy, listen for other people on your team and their potential traits that may align them to certain numbers. Now, don't go typing them, but I just want you to listen for how others might be viewing the world that you work with on a regular basis. So Bea, over to you. You like to start with the body types, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Yeah. I like to start with 8, 9, and 1. So starting with type 8, 8s tend to focus on power and control and strength and who has power and how are they using it. They're very decisive and confident, but they can be overconfident and think that their truth in terms of how they see the situation equals the objective truth when it doesn't.
The truth.
Yeah. Their truth is not always the truth. And sometimes they have a hard time seeing that. And they have a hard time hearing from others. And others have a hard time communicating when that might be the case because they can seem very powerful and kind of scary. At work, 8s are people who gravitate toward leadership positions. Every type can be a good leader. Some leaders in different cultures will sort of be more natural in that position, or they'll gravitate there, or people will look to them as leaders because of their personality style. And 8s are one of those types. So they're sort of the natural kind of CEO type. They like to be in charge. Now, sometimes there's a stereotype about 8s that they need to be in charge, but that's not true. 8s will say, I don't need to be in charge, but what they don't like is if the person in charge is not doing their job. If there's any kind of leadership vacuum, that's hard, right? Or if the leader is not doing a good job or somehow oppressing people or treating people badly, the 8, there's this sense of wanting leaders to be good and wanting things to move forward. These are action-oriented people. And the reason why they tend to be good in sort of the Western culture workplace is because they like to get things done and they like challenges, right? They sort of come alive when there's a big challenge to be done. And they're good at sort of saying, okay, how are we going to move this forward? Let's take action. So 8s have a natural strength for leadership, but because they don't acknowledge or aren't always aware of their vulnerability, which again is a strength if you're going into a battle, it helps not to be in touch with your vulnerability. And 8s are actually good at conflict. Many types avoid conflict. 8s are one of the few types that are okay with conflict, which is another reason why they do well in business, because there are some types that are shying away from certain experiences and difficult conversations. And the 8s will be more like, well, let's just deal with it. But they can move into action too quickly. They don't recognize their impact very often, right? And they may think that they're just moving the project ahead, and they may not realize that other people find them unapproachable or intimidating. So, of course, when I coach an 8 leader, one of the things I'll say is, can you find ways to be more approachable? And when 8s can selectively self-disclose vulnerability with their people they work with, that's huge. Because when 8s realize that actually it takes great strength to be vulnerable, like vulnerability doesn't equal weakness, it means being human and sharing more of your depth with others in terms of helping them connect with you more and trust you more.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next body type, the 9s.
So 9s are sometimes called the peacemaker or the mediator, and their attention goes out to other people and the environment around them. They sense when things are harmonious or disharmonious, and they like harmony and they avoid conflict. And they tend to be more aware of what's going on in the environment energetically than they are inside themselves. And this is an issue because in a work environment, 9s can sometimes appear like they don't have opinions or like they can't make decisions because they're focusing more on going with the flow or following other people's agendas or not rocking the boat, because most of all, 9s want harmony and connection and people working together well without aggression or conflict. And if you want that, if that's your coping strategy, and if you're sensitive to disconnection like they are, it's a recipe for going to sleep to what you think and feel and believe, and especially any anger or disagreement or strong opinions. So 9s sort of numb out to that. They sort of forget themselves. Like if you ask a 9, what do you want? It can be hard for them to know what the answer is. they can really not know. And that right there is a little bit distressing for the nine themselves, but it can also be hard for people who work with them. If they don't know what they want, if they have a hard time making decisions because they don't know what they want. And when they don't know what they want, it's really easy for them to say, well, what do you want? And I'll just go with your agenda. But what sometimes happens with nines is they don't feel heard by others. And of course, that's hard because they sometimes don't make themselves heard. They don't come forward with their opinion because they've often had an experience in the past of other people having louder voices, of not being listened to, of being overlooked. And so it's a little bit risky. It feels risky for them to state an opinion because it feels like either it might cause a conflict or it might not be heard. But in order to develop themselves, whether it's in leadership or just in good working relationships, they need to learn that they can't just lean on their strength for being affable and friendly and easygoing and being a good mediator because they're good at seeing all sides of things. They need to also develop more consciousness of what they think and feel inside and an ability to express that and risk coming in conflict with others, because sometimes conflicts are positive. And if you're avoiding conflict, you're often avoiding a lot of other things, like certain interactions with people or hearing other people's opinions. And so nines need to go from being the people who are really good at harmonizing the environment, listening to everyone, making sure everybody else is heard, to putting themselves more in the picture and knowing more what they want and being more of a decisive presence in the work setting.
Got it. And how about ones?
So ones focus their attention a lot on how whatever's happening could be more perfect, right? And so in the work setting, ones tend to be people who work very hard. People have a hard time delegating because it's like only I have my vision of perfect and will work hard to get it there, and other people won't do it as well as I will, and they can be rigid in the ways they do things because they can tend to think there's one right way and it's my way. And it's fun working with ones when they first learn their Enneagram type, because certain things really shock them. Like, why would you be someone that isn't always going for the absolute most perfect product you could possibly have, even if that means overworking and turning it in late, because it has to be as perfect as possible. And they also sometimes are surprised that other people don't have the same kind of moral code that they do. And one of the things that can be hard for them at work is that when other people aren't following the rules that they think are implicit in the workplace or the way people should do things, when they're late or when they turn things in late and they're not trying as hard as the one does to do everything right, it can create tension and anger. Now, the body types also all have an important relationship to anger. The head types have an important relationship to fear, and the heart types have an important relationship to sadness or grief. And ones tend to be types that feel a lot of anger, but feel bad about expressing it. Like they can think it's wrong to be angry. And of course, in the workplace, it can be tricky to express anger. But when they don't express their anger, and by the way, anger gets generated in ones as being frustrated with what's happening compared to what should be happening, right? They might feel angry inside, but because they think it's wrong to express anger, the anger leaks out. Like when we don't feel and process our feelings consciously, they leak out. And for ones, they leak out as irritation, annoyance, self-righteousness, and other things that other people that work with them can sometimes feel. So the growth path for ones is really owning some of the rigidity, some of the ways they think things should be done the right way, and a lack of flexibility around thinking about how things should be done, but also learning to break the rules, learning not to be so structured and so hard on themselves about doing everything right, learning that it's important to have fun and pleasure and relax also, and not be so focused on what the right thing is and getting things perfect all the time.
Got it. It's funny. I worked with the one a while ago when I first learned about the Enneagram, and when they first joined our team, there would be documents that maybe, let's say I created, and I would see that person go into the Google Doc and just start making these edits. And I remember feeling this like, ooh, I was not happy about it, and it felt personal.
Yeah.
And then once I really understood, I was like, oh, I get it. This person isn't thinking about me. It's not personal. They're going in to edit what they believe is the right way, or in a way that is the right way to actually make this document look.
Exactly.
And that was all it was about. I also notice, just a quickie on the body types, and I'm sure this is the same for all three centers of intelligence, is the difference between like the 8, for example, and maybe some of their lack of some of that sensitivity around their impact on others. And then you mentioned the 1 is really sensitive to it. So just noting how different each of the types are inside the center of intelligence is also important too. Okay, so those are the 3 body types. 8s, also known as active controllers, 9s, known as adaptive peacemakers, and 1s, known as strict perfectionists or reformers. Next up, we have the 3 heart types, 2s, 3s, and 4s.
So the heart types, 2, 3, and 4. So 2 is my type. So I know this one the best. 2s focus a lot on others and on relationships. A 2 learns early on not to express needs. They adopt a coping strategy that's a little bit like, I'm going to be someone that you will like and want to connect with, even if that means being less authentically me, right? And again, there's not an intention to be inauthentic. The priority is making good connections and being liked or approved of by others. So at work, 2s see work through the lens of relationship. And again, they're surprised to hear that not everybody does this. It's a little bit like, I'm motivated, not just to do the work, although doing tasks and getting things done is very motivating, but it's more like how that will impact others, right? So my boss will like me more if I am doing all my work really well, or if I'm anticipating their needs before they even ask and providing it, and hearing things like, wow, I couldn't have done it without you, or, oh, that was just what I needed. Those things really make the 2 feel really good. But of course, all of these things cause problems in working relationships. And for 2s empathize too much. They sense too much how others are feeling. So I'm so afraid of hurting you that I sugarcoat my feedback. And so the message doesn't come across. And so 2s get into trouble at work by not stating their own needs clearly and their own preferences, being too focused on others in a way that can even be invasive to others. Like, well, I didn't really ask for that help and you gave it to me anyway. And what I really would have needed is something you didn't do, So 2s can sort of think, well, I know what you need better than you do, and not be really open to what their impact is. Because 2s, it's very hard for 2s to feel criticized. And they can take things really personally, really easily, and get hurt very easily by normal business feedback. I've had to learn, like, okay, that's not personal, that's business. It's not a reflection on me as a person, but 2s have a really hard time separating those things.
So is the path for them then to become less sensitive? Is that the idea?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because early on, one of my coaches said, I think you need to grow a thicker skin, right? And so, yeah, it's growing a thicker skin. It's focusing on more on myself and less on other people. It's being more okay if not everyone likes me or is pleased with everything I do. Like, especially, let's say I'm a boss and I need to do some things that aren't going to be popular because it's the right thing to do for the company or the team. I need to be able to do that. So I need to get less sensitive to disapproval of others and sort of center myself more in terms of what are my needs and what do I think and what's my view of the situation? How do I feel about it? And have that be an important thing that feeds into what I do instead of just looking to others.
Even the things you're describing, it's a reminder too of the fact that our Enneagrams aren't the only thing that make up the way that we move about the world, because a lot of what you're saying I resonate with. And I think that's partially because of my gender, because of my race, because of my culture. It's all of the things that make us who we are.
Exactly. Our histories, our biographies, our cultural environment, the family we grew up in, the messages from our parents, all of these things play a big role.
Yeah. But let's talk about three. And I also want to highlight that last time you said that America is a very three kind of culture. And so I imagine then our workplaces are also very
Yes.
three culture. So what does that look like to be a three in a three culture?
Yes, yes. So threes are very oriented toward matching an image of success. And it's a little bit like if I'm successful, then you'll admire me and then I'll feel loved and supported inside, right? Threes use their heart to read their audience. And this can be in the family, in the culture, in a particular organization. They read the room and they can sense through their heart like what people value as good or successful, and they become that. And so threes get really good at this. Like most threes that you'll run into have achieved a lot. They set goals and then they focus like a laser beam on that goal and nothing gets in their way until they achieve it. And they're very task oriented, very work oriented. They overwork. They're the biggest workaholics on the Enneagram. Now, there's a lot of obvious benefits to this, right? And especially in a culture that rewards success, that values people on how much money they make or what school they went to. All of these things you can hear are things we value in American culture. Now, the downside of this, and sometimes people don't see the downside of threes, the downside is they think they are what they do. They think they are the title or the image, but they're not that. None of us are. None of us equals a role we play, right? And so the pain of threes is that when they start doing inner work, they often don't know who they are. And it feels threatening to feel their emotions because emotions get in the way of doing. You know, my friend says emotions are not aerodynamic. They slow you down if you're a three. So it's threatening for a three to feel their own emotions. And yet their own emotions are the biggest indicator of who they really are, what's really important to them. A lot of threes wake up mid-career and realize they're doing something they don't like at all. They're doing what their father wanted them to do or what the culture that they lived in valued as successful. And they're not happy at all. They never consulted with themselves because they were really kind of identifying with what they were supposed to be and not even asking who they really are. And so threes need to really focus on that. So in terms of American culture, it's very much a culture based on surfaces and admiring celebrities. Why? Because they're on TV or because they made a lot of money or because they look a certain way physically, you know? And so it perpetuates that very superficial culture that's based on what you look like and how much money you make and not really the content of your character or who you really are inside.
I also want to call out that there is one version of the three that sort of rejects this at the surface level. So I've worked with some of these threes, and my partner is a self-preservation three, which is this type where they go, it's not about image for me. It's not about looks. I don't need to be the most successful or appear this way. So they don't immediately identify with the three in that way. But you do find under the surface that there is that kind of identity, right?
Yes. So this is why the subtypes are super important because there's a lot of self-preservation threes out there who sometimes don't relate to three at first, like you're saying, because they don't necessarily need to win everything and be on top of everything. It's a three who deep down wants to look good and wants people to admire their image, but also wants to be a good person. It's more like they compete with their own past record. And they are more about doing things well, not just looking well, but deep down, they do want people to admire them. It's just, it feels really hard to want that because it feels like it's something that's bad.
So how does a three work against what we reward as a culture to grow? What does a three in growth look like?
Yeah, so it's hard sometimes for threes to grow, especially if they're really successful. I worked with a guy once in a company I was bringing the Enneagram into, and he basically said to me, look, if they want me to change, they're going to have to change my reward structure because I'm getting rewarded for what I'm doing now. And the thing is that he was getting 360-degree feedback that people didn't find him approachable or easy to connect with. I think what they really need to do is get in touch with their own feelings, slow down. Threes really, if they don't slow down, life slows them down. So a lot of threes have had some sort of breakdown, burnout, an injury, an illness, So it's slowing down, leaving more room for more work-life balance, getting more in touch with emotions, because instead of slowing you down, emotions tell you who you really are and what you really value and what's important to you. And when you communicate with people from that place, you're actually more powerful. And it leads to a deeper kind of success, because instead of just conforming to a worldly, conventional view of what's successful, you can define it more for yourself.
Before we go on break, let's recap. The Enneagram 3, also known as the competitive achiever, is the number that American work culture is most closely connected to. Being defined by our image, believing we are what we do or what we have. And as she puts it, we can break this habit by simply slowing down and asking questions like, why are we doing what we're doing? Asking if speed is equivalent to productivity, and defining our own version of success. We'll be back in just a few moments with Bea Chestnut. And we're back with Bea Chestnut on how the rest of the Enneagram types look at work and how they grow, starting with type 4. All right, I know there are less, or I think I've heard there are less type 4s a lot of times in corporate environments. And I don't know if that's actually true, but I'm curious if that's what you've heard.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the industry. It's a stereotype that all 4s are artists, but they tend to have an aesthetic sensibility and a creative vision about how things should be. Yeah, more of a corporate environment. Sometimes 4s find that environment uncomfortable because 4s have a harder time conforming. They value being who they are authentically, but oftentimes that means that they do get negative feedback from the environment, that they're too sensitive or too emotional or too whatever. They're probably the most in touch with emotions and a wider range of emotions of all 9 types. And 4s tend to focus their attention more on their inner world and on comparing themselves to others and finding themselves either on the low side or the upside of that comparison. And many 4s focus on how they don't measure up or how they're not good enough because they're, on the one hand, in touch with their real feelings and their authentic truth, but sometimes that doesn't always match up with what conventional society says you should be. And so there's a sensitivity to getting the message that there's something wrong with me and that other people have something that I lack. Now, the 3/4s are very different from one another. So we really have to include subtypes in really with all the types, but especially with like 4s and 6s, and then maybe secondarily with like 3s and 1s. But self-preservation 4s hold their feelings more inside. They can actually on the outside look like 3s or 1s or sometimes even 7s because they're very busy. They get very good at doing tasks and working really, really hard. But for 4s, it's almost like they make a virtue of enduring suffering. And sometimes suffering is working too hard, right? And these are people who can look very pleasant, happy on the outside, but inside they're really struggling, but they don't share it with other people. They feel this need to prove themselves, so they can often work super hard and be very successful, but it costs them a lot and they don't share that with others. Now, social 4s tend to be more in their emotions, and they, I would say, have the hardest time in a corporate setting because it's hard for them to disconnect from their emotions. In fact, they identify with their emotions. And so when people in corporate settings don't really want to hear about your feelings about something, 4s feel judged by that. The 1-to-1 4 is a 4 that actually leads with anger. It's the angriest type on the Enneagram. And anger gets generated sometimes because people don't see how special I am, and people don't acknowledge my feelings and emotions, and the world doesn't meet my needs. They can be people at work who are really out there saying their opinions and getting mad if they're misunderstood, but also having a big creative vision. Like many people think Steve Jobs was the 1-to-1 4, and he got in fights with people and he really fought for his creative vision and people thought he was hard to deal with. And yet, his creative vision was very powerful.
He did it.
Yeah.
Right. And so then the path, what does a 4 do?
When I coach 4s in big organizations, what I try to help them do is help them see how people around them don't necessarily experience them or the world around them the way they do. That people aren't as much in their emotions. And it's not better or worse, it's just different, And so find better ways of communicating about their emotions or their preferences in ways that people can understand and take that as a responsibility, but also try to reduce a sense of sensitivity or oversensitivity to people not understanding you, because sometimes they just won't, and other times you can help them by communicating in different ways.
All right, those are your 3 heart types. 2s are also known as the helpers, 3s are the competitive achievers, and 4s are the intense creatives. All right, let's move to head types. Type 5.
So type 5 is sometimes called the observer or the expert. This is the most introverted and the least connected with emotions of all the types. And so it's almost like they retreat into their heads and they get very mental, very intellectual. And other people can sometimes find them mysterious or aloof because they can feel uncomfortable interacting with people sometimes, especially if emotions are involved. So 5s automatically disconnect from emotions and go to the head, and they feel most comfortable meeting what's happening in the world through thinking, mental activity, analysis. And they're quite good at this, and they're very good at going deep into something, and they really appreciate knowledge and learning. But they can have trouble in relationships because, like in a work setting, they may not share much about themselves. And it can be sort of a norm at work to share a little bit of yourself so you get to know each other and you have kind of an ease of flow. And it can seem weird that this person's not saying anything about themselves. And the truth is 5s can feel awkward socially. And so they can take refuge in what they know or what they can research or what they can learn about, as opposed to interpersonal connections, which for them is not their comfort zone. They have a mentality of scarcity when it comes to their energy. It's almost like I only have a certain amount of energy, and so they can be sensitive to people taking up their time or invading their space. Long meetings, if they don't end on time, that can be hard. And in terms of emotions, their work is getting more in touch with their emotions, especially in the moment. They can feel their emotions easier when they're by themselves, but in the moment, if they can get more in touch with their emotions, that's good.
And then how about for 6s? I know this was one where you said that subtypes really matter, so I want to give that space too.
Yeah, so 5, 6, and 7s can be said to be fear types. And in each center, one type overdoes the core emotion, one type underdoes it, like doesn't really experience it consciously very much, and the other type is sort of in the middle. And 6s are most in their fear of the 3 fear types. Although when people, and this happens a lot when I work in business settings, when people first learn the Enneagram and learn they're a 6, what they often say is they didn't realize that they were motivated largely by fear, because they call fear something else. They call it perfectionism or being a good problem solver or being really good at being prepared for different contingencies. 6s are really good troubleshooters in the work setting. They're good problem solvers. But the focus of attention for a 6 is they're always looking for what could go wrong. And it's like when you become a good problem solver, it means you tend to be a good problem seeker. Right. So on teams, people perceive them as pessimistic or kind of a downer because the 3s and the 7s are all excited about the positive things that are going to happen. And the 6 is saying, hey, slow down and let's think about what could go wrong. And that's not something everyone wants to think about, especially to the level that 6s do. But 6s really offer a value. It's a strength, really, especially on a team, to be the person who's saying, hey, let's plan ahead of time so we know what to do in case that happens, right? So that's kind of the way they think. And it's a strength. Like fear does help us alert us to dangers before they happen, but it focuses their attention too much on the negative and it makes them anxious and tense and fearful. So it makes them risk averse sometimes. Now, here's when we need to talk about the different subtypes of 6. Just like when we talk about fear, there are different fear responses like fight or flight. So there's one 6 that's more of a fight 6 that actually looks like an 8 that's more like proactively moving toward fear. This is the 1-1 6. And then there's another 6 that's the self-preservation 6 that's more fearful and more the flight 6. I'm going to run away if I see something that's scary, or I'm going to find protectors. Now, the other six, the social six, is a six that basically tries to find a good authority and then adhere to the rules and reference points of that authority. And so each of these three sixes has particular ways of coping with fear and uncertainty. So sixes are trying to find certainty, but never getting it. Sixes can have a hard time when they're leaders because it's hard for them to act decisively. They're kind of being fearful, and that's not always a good message to send the people you're working with, that you're fearful or scared of moving forward. And so sixes need to develop more courage, and they need to get more in touch with fear before they get more courageous.
Okay. And I like the distinction there because those sixes are so different.
Yes.
I've worked with a few and have friends who are sixes, and I have a 1-to-1 six friend who I'm like, oh my gosh, you look so much like an 8 to me. And then I've worked with the six that's called warmth, which I think is self-preservation.
Yes.
And they're very different. They feel different. Okay, how about sevens, the one we've all, well, some of us have been waiting for?
Yes. So seven is a fear type, but doesn't look like a fear type, right? Most sevens will say they're not very aware of feeling fear. Mostly sevens really focus on what's positive. Why would you feel bad if you could feel good? Right. And it feels like a choice, right?
Yeah.
Why would anyone feel bad? Like it feels like
Right.
I choose to feel good. And so I feel good. I focus on the things that make me feel good. Right. But of course, the blind spot for sevens is that focusing on the positive comes from a fear of pain or a fear of suffering, because sevens have this underlying fear that if I let in an uncomfortable emotion, I'll be trapped in it forever. But this fear has different manifestations in the workplace, and that is, one of them is sevens don't like hierarchy, right? They don't like to function within hierarchy because they don't want someone above them telling them what to do, and they don't want to tell anyone else what to do. And so sometimes it can be hard for them to be the boss because they're sort of laissez-faire, like just like they want people to be with them, like live and let live is kind of more their motto. Like everyone should be able to do what they want, but that's not really how it works when you're working with people. So they can have a hard time not so much delegating, but following up with people they've delegated things to, having the difficult conversation with the person that you're working with. I've worked with leaders who are really great in many ways as seven leaders in inspiring. They're good at keeping the morale up and focusing on the positive in ways that help people feel good about the work that's being done. But then when you need to have that difficult conversation with the person who's not performing or with someone you're having a problem with, sevens can want to avoid that because it's like they have to enter into some difficult feelings. One of the things sevens learn when they do self-development is that wanting to control your experience and make it positive all the time and avoiding pain actually leads to more pain. And so it can be hard for sevens to just be like still and focused in the present moment. And by the way, sevens can look a lot like threes, but a big difference is sevens have a much harder time focusing. Threes are really good at focusing on a goal and doing everything to get there. Sevens get distracted by interesting things and pleasurable things, and it can be hard for them to really focus and do something that means kind of contending with difficult data or something that's negative that's happening or something that's painful.
I definitely think I'm a 7 at this point. I think about opening my computer and people look at my tabs and they're like, you have 700 tabs open. I know because someone told me something really interesting and I had to Google it right away and I had to do something else and then someone told me something else. And so it's all open and I'm going to get to it and learn the thing.
Yes, yes.
So those are the 3 head types. 5s, also known as the quiet specialists. 6s, known as loyal skeptics. And 7s, the enthusiastic visionaries. Thank you so much for going through each of these. I also want to call out that and maybe you can add a little color to this. Not everyone who hears their type may hear all things that feel relevant to them today, but you might be able to look back and go, oh, I remember when I was like that.
Yes. It may be hard to find your type or identify clearly with a type because you've changed, for one thing, and so it's important when you're assessing what type you are to think about your life as a whole, not just the past, not just the present, especially not just the present, because people naturally grow and change, right? Like anyone who's had a career, who's done a couple of jobs, has gotten feedback and things have just not worked sometimes. So it's really important to recognize, on the one hand, if something doesn't ring true, it's good to look a little deeper because the Enneagram Enneagram types help us see our blind spots, things that are true about us, but that we're not very conscious of. And so really, asking questions, asking friends for feedback can really help you in finding where you land.
And then for those of us who are not threes operating in what tends to be maybe like a type 3 environment, what's the suggestion you have for us? I know probably a lot of us have sort of molded ourselves to act a little more like threes. So I'm curious what you'd recommend we do to sort of deal with that personality diversity.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good to be more aware, first of all, of when you're expressing yourself in a way that's really you. Like I think we all have experiences at work where we're doing something and we experience a flow, or wow, I'm delivering exactly the kind of thing I want to be delivering in life or in work. And then other times when we're kind of being pushed into something where we have to adapt more, or it's sort of painful because we're having to act in ways or present ourselves in ways that aren't really us. And I think what's good is to be able to get conscious of that first and then question it. Can we look at the ways we're doing things or the assumptions and expectations we have about how things should be done and really see maybe we could be doing them better? Because I think in this type 3 work style environment, a lot of times it's not okay to express emotions when actually that would be a really positive thing. I think the Enneagram is being used more and more in businesses with leaders and teams, and I think this is a really good thing. And I always admire the leaders who choose to bring the Enneagram in, because I think to myself, this person is more aware and understands that if people can be more themselves and bring more of who they really are to work, everything's going to be better for everyone, including the business. By the way, organizations can have cultural types, right? Like you can have a 9 organization where it's not okay to surface conflict. And that creates big problems because often we need conflicts to move us forward. The stages of team development are, forming, storming, norming, and performing. And if you can't storm, you can't perform. So it helps us to know the Enneagram, to notice not only what we need to develop in ourselves, but what's missing in our teams and what our organization is overdoing and what the American corporate environment is overdoing. And I think when we get pushed to be threes, I think one of the things we can start doing is bringing that out, talking about that, within our teams or with our leaders and saying, I feel like I'm being pushed to do this and it's coming from a cultural norm that I don't think is good for me or what we're doing here. And I think the more people can have those conversations, the more the team or the organization can develop along with the individuals.
Better when it comes to organizations, I've noticed oftentimes is associated with more effective, more strategic, more productive is where we end up, right? And so better kind of then lends back into this cycle of going into 3 mode, where what you're saying is like, better could actually be leaning into things that we don't align with, that aerodynamic feeling of ignoring emotions, right? It can actually say, like, we need to sit with this. We need to actually spend more time thinking. I mean, I've worked with so many people where I've been like, well, how often do you sleep on things? And they say never, because in work environments, they aren't given that permission. But if you could sleep on it, wake up tomorrow and share your idea, what could be different about what you share and how you impact the team if that becomes a cultural norm?
Exactly.
And I think that's part of what leads to burnout, is you're constantly trying to align yourself to, I mean, for me, I'm not a 3, and I constantly trying to align myself to that has definitely led to this feeling of burnout.
Yes. And I think burnout itself is such a strong indicator that we're a 3 culture that needs to get more conscious, right? Because a lot of people, not just 3s, get burned out. And I do agree exactly like you're saying, if we can see these things and get conscious of them and talk about them, to be able to say that you're too anxious or to say that you're depressed or say that you're unhappy in your work is the first thing that can help you on your growth path. But I think in our 3 culture, for a long time, that hasn't been okay.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. This has been so informative and And I think it's a really good, this is like more than a primer. This is a really strong, I'll call it a primer. This is a really strong primer for anyone who's interested in exploring this. All right, Bea, I'm going to have you complete these 3 statements a day later to see if anything's changed.
I might say the same thing.
You might, and who knows, you might not.
Yeah,
Different day.
yeah.
Better humans are.
Open and self-aware and self-accepting.
Better colleagues are.
Flexible, generous, and open to really looking at themselves.
I'm going to do another pivot here. Better leaders are.
Dedicated to working on their own self-awareness and supporting that of others.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for being here. This was great. I appreciate you bringing all of your knowledge, expertise, and all the history of the Enneagram. So thank you, Bea. That was Bea Chestnut, Enneagram expert, psychotherapist, and author of the books The Complete Enneagram and The 9 Types of Leadership. If you're like me and you want to keep nerding out on the Enneagram, she and her business partner, Aranyo, actually co-host a popular podcast called Enneagram 2.0. So head over to wherever you get your podcast to check it out. If this conversation resonated with you, share it with the first person who comes to mind. You never know how it could help them out. And support other people like you in finding our show by leaving us a rating before you go. While you're at it, write a 1-sentence review telling me and the team what you love about our show. And, as always, you can get me in your inbox by signing up for our weekly personal development newsletter giving you practical tips on how to level up with small steps every day. Find it in our show notes for the episode or at linkedin.com/everydaybetter. That's linkedin.com/everydaybetter. Everyday Better is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Grace Rubin. Our associate producer is Emily Reeves. Asaf Gadron is our sound engineer. He makes sure we sound good in the studio. Joe DeGiorgi mixed our show. Enrique Montalvo is the executive producer of LinkedIn Editorial Productions. Dave Pond is head of news production. Courtney Koop is head of LinkedIn Original Audio and Video. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. And I'm Leah Smart. As usual, thanks for coming with me, and I'll see you next week.